Hey, YouTube folks, welcome to another video. And in today's video, guys, we're going to see a very interesting game that happened between Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja at Norway Chess 2020. All right, this game was played in the second round of this tournament and had a very interesting ending. And I'm going to play a little video up here over my camera exactly at the moments when the interesting outcomes happen in the game, okay? It was a really interesting game. Not just because of the game itself, but also because of the players' reactions. For those who aren't very up to date, this event here is happening in person, and everything is within the safety guidelines, right? Given our current situation, but it's happening in person. And let's see how this match went and what those reactions were. So let's go straight to today's match. Now. Here we are, guys. And playing white was the current world chess champion, Magnus Carlsen, against Alireza Firouzja. And Magnus starts here with a d4. The game continues with knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, d5, and Magnus Carlsen then exchanges the central pawn. And this is an interesting plan for those who play with the white pieces, right? Usually, when this capture happens, this exchange in the center, white will go for some kind of minority attack in the middle game. It doesn't mean that's exactly what's going to happen in this game, but those are usually the main ideas. Magnus played bishop to g5, followed by c6, e3, and h6. Firouzja is challenging Magnus about the bishop on g5, asking if he'll give it up, right? Magnus declined and played bishop to h4. The game continues with bishop to e7 and queen to c2, defending f5 from bishop development. The game continued with castling, knight to f3, rook to e8, bishop to d3, then knight to e4. Firouzja makes an interesting move, improving the knight's position and creating a central blockade. There's the idea of exchanging bishops, so Magnus here exchanged the bishops. Queen's bishop for e7, and now, at this moment, Firouzja. Magnus here plays bishop takes e4. He couldn't take with the knight here, right? Because otherwise there's the pawn capture here, and now white is getting hit with a nasty little fork, a very losing one, right? So Magnus noticed this, moved the knight, which was strong in the center like a Pegasus. Pawn takes e4, then knight to d2. The pawn is heavily attacked, so Firouzja plays f5, and Magnus then makes a very interesting decision. He castles queenside, moving the king there. Let's see how this unfolds now, right? The game continued here with knight d7, g4, g4, Grobiano, played by Magnus. A creative idea. Interesting to try breaking the e4 pawn's defense now, right? So Firouzja at this moment actually took the g4 pawn, and then the central pawn was captured, right? Magnus develops the knight. It's a very interesting move. Knight to b6 was played here by Firouzja, and Magnus plays knight to g3. And right after that, we'll see that one of Magnus's ideas is to start moving this center, because he also has a super strong pawn center here, right? The game proceeds with bishop to b6, Firouzja develops, and then Magnus plays a prophylactic move. Although the pawn on a 2 is defended here by the knight, even so, Magnus plays here in this position with king to b1. You're adding a new defense so the knight is free to jump, right? The game continued with rook to f8 pressuring f2, which is weak since the g4 pawn blocks the f-pawn's advance, right? Play continues with e4. Magnus moves to the center while Firouzja places his rook on the d-file. Magnus then moves his rook to the e-file, and the game proceeds with queen to f6. A direct attack now on the pawn. He attacked the f2 pawn directly, and Magnus here. Since he's a very creative player, he found a creative way to create counterplay here in this position. He didn't defend the f2 pawn. Instead, he played f4. He pushed the pawn forward, allowing this pawn to fall. Also with the queen, right? But Firouzja chooses a different line here and plays the best move in this position, right? Capturing the pawn en passant gives him a passed pawn. But what's the creative idea, Raphael Chess, the one you mentioned about Magnus? The creative idea is that Magnus will play queen f2, which he did. And notice that the g-file has opened up here, and that's Magnus's creative idea. He gave up a pawn in exchange for a file that could become an attacking theme for white's position. So, let's see what happens. You guys are in the mess here, right? The game continues with knight to c4, improving the knight's position. Magnus here brings the rook to the file. G, which was his plan, right? Rook to G1 queen to F4, then bishop to B3 challenged this advanced knight near the king, right? So in this position, Firouzja brought the knight back, as Armando would say. The game at this moment continues with the move king to B2. Firouzja here continues with rook to F7, already threatening to double up on the file. F, right? Since he has a passed pawn, it's a tough position for Magnus Carlsen, okay? He's in a tough spot here in this position, but there's still a lot of game left. The game continues with rook to D2, then DF. 8 rook doubling on the F file, followed by rook to E1. And at this moment, they're going to make a few moves, because it's still not clear what the white's plan is or what the black's plan is, because there's a strong pawn on F3, but it can't move forward. So, how will you handle that? The game continues with king H8. Firouzja pauses, then plays rook D3 and rook F4. And, at this moment, Magnus now starts to create another plan. He begins to mobilize the pawns in the center. He plays here with E5, which is an interesting move here for white, but it also brings risk, since it opens up many squares in the position, right? Of course, white can occupy those squares too, but black can also occupy those squares in white's as well. Always watch out for the passed pawn. At this moment, Firouzja here, he hesitated. As you can see in the video playing above, notice that Firouzja, he touched the knight, but he was unsure if he could put the knight on F5 or not. So he went back, reassessed the position, and right after that, since he had already touched the knight and he had to play with the knight, right? He actually played knight to F5, which, by the way, is a good move, okay? It's a good move, though interesting since he was undecided and now rook takes F3 as possible. In this position, Magnus here, he improved the position of his knights, okay? He played with the knight from C4, improved it because the pawn on F3 is a target, and this pawn will end up falling at some point. With Firouzja's knight moving to F5, Magnus improves his knight's position before capturing the pawn. The game continues here with bishop to D5. And now, yes, rook takes on F3, the little pawn falls, and at this moment, they go for a very direct sequence of exchanges, as we're going to see, right? Knight captures on G3, then pawn recaptures. Oops, there was a little fork here, but there's also a tactical theme, because there's rook takes on F3 here, right? In this position, then, rook takes on F3 was played. Firouzja is attacking Magnus's queen. Firouzja's queen is also under attack. It's a real mess. The game continues with queen takes F3, then rook takes F3. So now you have to take Firouzja's rook. Firouzja, right? Magnus took it. And at this moment, Firouzja made an interesting decision to go for a rook endgame. Bishop takes on E4, rook takes on E4, and he went for this endgame. Well, it's a very, very dangerous endgame, right? Because it's white who has a passed pawn. And as we know, in endgames, the kings have to come and give support as quickly as possible so that the king gets into an active position, right? King to G8 by Firouzja. Magnus played king to A3, then king to F7, king to B4, and now H5, an interesting move by Firouzja. We'll see that one of his ideas in this rook endgame is to play rook to G3 and G4. Because if Magnus trades the G-pawn, it will end up becoming a very dangerous passed pawn. And Magnus's king is a bit far from the king's side here. That will be Firouzja's plan, but Magnus will have his own plans too. The game continues with A4 king, E6 5, rook G3, aiming for rook G4, then A6. A very, very interesting and creative move. Once again, Magnus using his creativity, right? Firouzja, here he played B6. The idea behind A6. A6 is that if you take the pawn, this little B pawn here will end up holding back this whole block of black pawns. And Magnus's king, at some point, can also jump to the C5 square to take the C6 pawn, and right after that, he'll have 2 passed pawns. This idea is possible, but you need to be careful and prepare for it. If the C6 pawn falls and these pawns advance, it could seriously threaten black's position. So after a 6, Firouzja didn't take that pawn, he played B6. The game continued with the king on C4 controlling the D5 square. And then, now yes, Firouzja plays his rook to G4, putting pressure on the H4 pawn. It's not good for Magnus to take here, since rook takes G4 and black gets a good position. In this endgame, Magnus moves king to D3, Firouzja plays rook to G3, and Magnus responds with rook to E3, offering a rook exchange. If they trade, the endgame is equal, so a draw is expected. So Firouzja didn't trade the rooks here, he played rook to G4 again, and Magnus didn't play rook to E4 here. Although it's a possibility, right? Magnus here, he was bold, he went for it, he played here, activating the rook to f3. His idea is to invade the 8th rank and start poking at Firouzja's pawns. So Firouzja, in this position, played here with c5, breaking up this pair of pawns, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn. Now Magnus plays rook f8, activating aggressively. Firouzja responds with king takes e5, and Magnus follows with rook f7. At this moment, in these last 4 moves here, Firouzja already had very, very little time on the clock, okay? And the game? It added 1 second per move, which isn't much. For over-the-board chess, online chess, you do pre-moves, you play fast. 1 second actually makes a good difference, but in over-the-board chess, 1 second is very little. Because to make a move, to handle the pieces, it takes you about 1 or 2 seconds to make the moves. 1 second. You may take longer, but you won't gain anything from it. And at this moment, look at the video playing up here, Firouzja. He had problems with time. And after rook f7, which is a very strong move, right, attacking the pawn on a7 here, it's unclear how black defends against these ideas, right? Firouzja ended up letting his time run out and had a very, very peculiar reaction, right? He got really angry about running out of time. As you can see in the video, he slammed the rook on the board, the pawn jumped over there, it turned into a real mess. Firouzja's reaction, I saw that even in the international media, people reacted a lot. They thought it was really unusual, right? His reaction is aggressive there, right? For having lost the match, right? Of course, it's always a disappointment to lose on time. This is already the 2nd time this has happened to Firouzja in the World Blitz Championship. It was at the World Blitz Championship, right? I think so. He lost on time and reacted similarly, so he got really upset, right? This happens, but I'm also mentioning this interesting fact aside from the game, right? It was an interesting game with some interesting reactions from the players. So, what do you guys think? Firouzja got really, really nervous and hit the board hard, so Magnus ended up winning that game. Magnus is performing well in Norway Chess 2020, and I wanted to bring this game because it was very peculiar, very interesting. I hope you guys liked it too. So guys, if you liked it of this video, then don't forget to leave a big like down below. And if you're new here on the channel, go ahead and subscribe to this little channel, and I'll see you in the next videos, guys. Thanks. Next videos, guys. Thanks.